these elements. The law says that we should employ competent people in order to help us manage our requirements. And an easy way to remember what competency means is to remember the word SCATE. SCATE outlines the attributes required, the right level of skill, knowledge, training and experience to be able to carry out a job safely. So competence, the word SCATE. Skills, knowledge, attitude, training, and experience. Everyone attending this webinar will have a level of skill and knowledge. I shall come back to attitude in a second. If we want to build in skills and knowledge, we can provide training. And everyone will have different experiences from different workplaces, perhaps. But as you can see, attitude is deliberately in red in a larger font to draw your attention. As instructors, line managers, supervisors, charge hands, it doesn't matter which role that you have. We can all educate, we can coach, and we can guide people. But changing their attitude can be really difficult. Attitude drives behaviour. The most common phrase that I often hear is "it won't happen to me," or "safety is all common sense." Well, common sense to you and common sense to me will be very different. And it all depends on your skills, your knowledge, your attitude, your training, and your experience. This is how the law defines competency. But this is also how the law defines common sense. So we have a legal framework in the UK. So an act is an act of Parliament that creates a new law or changes an existing law. An act is a bill that has been approved by both the House of Commons and the House of Lords, and it's been given royal assent by the monarch. In Scotland, an act is approved by the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish First Minister. Then we have regulations. Regulations are law approved by Parliament, and these are usually made under the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974, following proposals from the Health and Safety Executive. And they cover various specific topics, such as working at height, displacement equipment and first aid, etc. And then we have approved codes of practice, or commonly known as ACOPs. So approved codes of practice provide precise detail to be given to the interpretation of a legislation. Approved codes of practice explains what would be considered the minimum satisfactory compliance standard. So for those who drive, an approved code of practice is very similar to the highway code. It tells you about the interpretation of legislation and what would be best practice. And then we have guidance notes. So guidance notes are a comprehensive series of guidance notes and booklets. Guidance notes have no statutory authority, but they're seen as good practice. And most importantly, you have an organisation's policies and procedures. So an organisation's policy and procedures should convert all the acts, all the regulations, the codes of practice and guidance notes, but most importantly, put them into practice. Policies and procedures are what we need to manage. And we can have platforms like safety management systems and how we manage them. The organisation that you work for, the policies and procedures should always refer to the legislative, the regulatorial context as set. And that's to ensure that the organisation is aligned to the requirements of the legal framework. So, the Health and Safety at Work Act. Section 2, employer's duty, is to ensure, so far as reasonably practicable, the health, safety and welfare at work of all his employees. Section 2.2, provide and maintain plant and systems of work that are so far as reasonably practicable, safe and without risk to health. To have arrangements for ensuring, so far as reasonably practicable, the safety and absence of risks to health in connection with the use, handling, storage and transport of articles and substances. Section 2.2 continued. To provide such information, instruction, training and supervision as is necessary to ensure, so far as reasonably practicable, the health and safety at work of his employees. So far as reasonably practicable as regards to any place of work under the employer's control, to maintain it in a condition that's safe and without risk to health, and provide and maintain means of access and egress that are safe and without such risks. Section 2.2 continued. To provide and maintain a working environment for his employees that is, so far as reasonably practicable, safe, without risk to health, and adequate as regard to facilities and arrangements for their welfare at work. Section 2.3, to prepare a written general health and safety policy. If 5 or more employees, the organisation and arrangements for carrying out the policy, it must be revised when it's appropriate, and it must bring the policy statement and any revision to the notice of all employees. Section 2.4, 2.5, 2.6 and 2.7, the appointment of safety reps from trade unions, the election of safety reps, the consulting of safety reps, and also to establish a safety commission and a safety committee if requested by the safety reps. Section 3.1, duties to others. It shall be the duty of every employer to conduct his undertaking in such a way as to ensure, so far as reasonably practicable, that persons not in his employment who may be affected by his work are not exposed to risk to their health and safety. Section 3.2, for those self-employed, to look after themselves and others who may be affected by work so far as reasonably practicable. Section 3.3, to provide information on risks from employers' undertakings to others who may be affected. Section 4, persons in control of premises. Ensure safety of people who work in the premises, the criminal counterpart of the Occupiers Liability Act. Section 5, control of harmful emissions into the atmosphere. Persons in control of premises to use best practicable means to prevent noxious or offensive substances being emitted into the air. There's also a duty to render harmless and inoffensive such substances as may be emitted. The Environmental Protection Act 1990 places a general emphasis and a greater emphasis on this. Section 6. Designers, manufacturers, importers and suppliers is to ensure that articles, so far as reasonably practicable, are so designed and constructed as to be safe and without risks when being set, cleaned, used or maintained by a person at work. Articles must also be tested and information provided to employees. That was amended by the Consumer Protection Act 1987. Section 7. Duties of employees. To take reasonable care for health and safety of himself and other persons who may be affected by his acts or omissions, and to cooperate with the employer to enable the employer to meet his statutory obligations. Section 8. Interference and misuse. No person shall intentionally or recklessly interfere with or misuse anything provided in the interests of health, safety and welfare. One of the few duties under health and safety law where the guilty mind has to be proven as mens rea. Section 9. No cost to employees. No employer shall levy or permit to be levied on any employee of his any charge in respect of anything done or provided in pursuance of any specific requirement of the relevant statutory positions. As I mentioned earlier, training must be provided free of charge. That also includes personal protective equipment. Section 15. The power to make regulations under the Act. So proposals are submitted by the Health and Safety Executive after consultation periods. And the Act has the power to repeal or modify existing statutory provisions. Section 16. Enforcement. Gives Health and Safety Executive the power to approve and issue approved codes of practice which provide guidance on how to comply with the Act and related legislation. The health and safety requires consent of Secretary of State, but must consult first. So an example is the management of health and safety at work regulations, or the control of substances hazardous to health regulations. Section 18, enforcement. So for local authorities, which include the retail, sales, offices, catering, entertainment, residential and accommodation, etc. And the Health and Safety Executive, in all circumstances where no other authority has been given responsibility, the Health and Safety Executive will take that responsibility and they'll manage that responsibility. Section 19, inspectors' appointments. Every Health and Safety Executive inspector is issued a warrant of appointment, and within that warrant of appointment will specify what powers that inspector has been given. Section 20, the powers of inspectors. To enter premises and bring police officers or others into those premises. To investigate, taking measurements, photographs and samples, conducting tests. They can inspect They can take copies of any documentation. They can confiscate or dismantle any article. And they have the power to interview anyone and also to take written statements. Section 21, improvement notices. This is when health and safety legislation has been contravened. The health and safety executive inspectors must specify the statutory provision breached and the reasons why. The inspectors may state what action is necessary to remedy matters. So, for example, they could give reference to guidance or approved codes of practice. Section 22 is prohibition notices. And this will occur when there's a risk of serious personal injury. And it will prohibit the carrying on of the work activity taking place. It can be immediate or it can be deferred. It doesn't have to be a breach of law. If a law is broken, the inspector must say so. And it must state the matters which give rise to the risk. And it may also include the required remedial actions. Section 33, offences, penalties and prosecutions. You have summary offences, indictment, there could be fines, imprisonment. So who can be prosecuted? Section 37 states, if an offence committed by a corporate body was committed with the consent or connivance of or because of the negligence of a director, manager, secretary or other officer, then they are also guilty of the offence and may be prosecuted as well as the corporate body. Now, Section 37 is often misunderstood, as people will understand it to be directors of a corporation. But that's not necessarily the case. Section 37 refers to everyone in the workplace, not just directors or senior managers. It refers to everyone. Section 36. For example, if someone, which we'll name as person A, commits an offence because of an act or default of another person, who's person B, then person B will also be guilty of the offence and can be prosecuted, whether or not proceedings are taken against person A. So person A could be an organisation, and that organisation could be telling someone what to do, as in person B. Both would be guilty of the offence. However, person B, who is the employee, may be the only person where proceedings are continued against. So this legislation is really important. So please make note in reference to it. Section 40, exclusion of civil liability. So there's no right of civil actions arising from any failure to comply with Sections 2 to Section 8 in the Health and Safety at Work Act. Breaches of any duties imposed by the building safety regulations are actionable unless the regulations themselves state otherwise. So, for example, the management regulations for now. Lone working is really important. And I thought I would bring this into this webinar because lone working is often overlooked. So this is the definition of a lone worker from the Health and Safety Executive. And that definition is someone that can work by themselves without closer direct supervision for all or part of the working day. And that could be someone working from a fixed base, one person working alone on a premises. They could be working separately from others on the same premises. For example, security staff. or staff working out normal working hours. They could be working away from a fixed base. For example, they could be construction workers, maintenance workers, health and safety officers. They could be working at home, or they could be mobile workers. For example, carers, floating support, long distance lorry drivers. But I want to bring your attention back to the definition, because the definition states for all or part of the working day. It doesn't specify a time. So for example, someone working alone could be for 5 minutes, could be for 10 minutes, could be for 30 minutes, could be 2 hours, could be 4 hours, could be 6, it could be 8 hours. The definition says for all or part of the working day. So when you have staff members or anyone that you're conducting a risk assessment for, if their role fits into any of the descriptions, and they will be, the role of health and safety is to currently assess what's currently in place for staff for their safety. For example, do they have access to mobile phones, mobile phone contact groups, emergency contact details? Have they carried out a personal safety risk assessment with their line manager? That could be a recommendation that you could make. Because from that risk assessment, an action plan can be created to reduce risk of a lone worker. And remember, over this webinar, we have covered several important sections of the Health and Safety at Work Act. Some of the sections might not affect you directly, but you can still play a part in keeping people safe. If you see an unsafe act, you should do what you can to stop it. Don't walk past a possible accident.